The matchmaker had just set her teacup down on the table when Chloe's older sister, Harper, suddenly sprang to her feet. "Mom, I changed my mind," Harper declared. "I'm not marrying Liam Smith anymore. I want to marry Vince Miller." The entire room fell dead silent. Their mother, Martha, froze with a handful of sunflower seeds. The matchmaker nearly dropped her teacup. Sitting nearby, Chloe stared at Harper's hands, gripping the hem of her shirt, then noticed the barely concealed impatience on her sister's face. In that instant, it dawned on Chloe. Her sister had come back in time, too. In their previous life, right in this very house, Martha had happily accepted the Smiths' proposal on Harper's behalf. Liam Smith owned a livestock farm. His family had land, a herd of pigs, and he supplied meat to several surrounding towns. In the eyes of the locals in Oakhaven, he was the most well-off among the eligible bachelors. Meanwhile, Martha had married Chloe off to Vince Miller. The Miller family wasn't wealthy by any means, but Vince was willing to pay a high bride price. Ultimately, very little of that money ever reached Chloe's hands. Their mother took most of it to pad Harper's dowry. After the wedding, however, Harper had never been satisfied with her life at the Smiths. She despised Liam's trade, complaining that he dealt with pigs all year round. Even when his clothes were clean, she always imagined he smelled of blood. The couple grew increasingly estranged, and eventually, Harper secretly began an affair with another man. Chloe's life had taken the opposite turn. Vince Miller drank and gambled every day, only coming home to demand more cash whenever he ran out. Realizing she couldn't rely on him, Chloe started bringing clothes back from town to sell. What began as a small stall grew into a storefront, and eventually, she expanded into the city to open a wholesale dealership. The money used to buy houses and shops, the very money Vince flaunted to others, was almost entirely earned by her. Harper only saw Chloe returning to their hometown driving a nice car, wearing gold jewelry, and owning multiple properties in the city. Consequently, she wrongfully assumed that Vince was destined for wealth. In the end, consumed by jealousy, Harper had struck Chloe in the back of the head with a hammer. Hey guys, is wealth about finding the right partner or building it yourself? Today's story follows two sisters with a second chance at life. One steals a man for a quick ticket to riches, while the other chooses independence. Let's dive in. Now, having just been reborn, the very first thing her sister did was steal the husband she believed would turn into a millionaire. Martha finally snapped out of her daze and slammed her hand on the table. "Have you lost your mind?" she yelled. Does anyone in Oakhaven not know what kind of man Vince Miller is? Just the other day, he was in a fistfight at the edge of town, and last month, he was caught peeping at women in the outhouse. You've got a perfectly good arrangement, and you're dumping Liam to marry him? Harper remained completely unfazed. Instead, she grabbed her mother's arm and pulled her up. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Come into the back room with me, Mom. Let me explain." The two of them disappeared into the adjoining bedroom. The matchmaker looked at Chloe with an awkward expression. "Chloe, if Harper really wants to switch, I suppose she can." She was caught off guard when Chloe calmly replied, "Who said I'm marrying him?" Chloe set her teacup down and glanced toward the back room. If she's marrying Vince Miller, then isn't the remaining arrangement pretty obvious? It took the matchmaker a few seconds to process this, after which she stared at Chloe in pure astonishment. A long while later, Martha and Harper emerged. Their mother's expression was still grim, but her initial fierce opposition had vanished. Chloe didn't even need to hear the conversation to guess what Harper had said. Her sister couldn't exactly confess to reincarnating. At most, she had probably sworn up and down that Vince would be wealthy in the future, while Liam would be stuck running a slaughterhouse forever. Martha had always favored Harper and coveted a life of luxury. As long as Harper sounded confident enough, it was only a matter of time before their mother caved. Sure enough, Martha looked at Chloe and said, "If your sister really wants to marry Vince, then it's fine if you marry Liam. The Smiths have good conditions, so you won't have to suffer if you go there." Chloe nodded without a moment's hesitation. Harper glanced at her, the corners of her lips curling up slightly. Clearly, she thought Chloe was exactly the same as in their previous life, obediently going along with whatever their mother arranged. What Harper didn't realize was that this time, Chloe had absolutely no intention of fighting her for anything. If her sister wanted Vince Miller so badly, she could hold on to him as tightly as she pleased. A few days later, the two families officially came over to discuss the dowry. The Smiths brought over money, fine fabrics, food, and various wedding supplies. After receiving the items, Martha's expression brightened up considerably. Before evening even fell, she pulled Harper into the bedroom to figure out what to buy for her. As Chloe walked past, she clearly heard her mother's voice. "I'll sew 2 more sets of wedding quilts. This part of the cash will be used to buy you a new wardrobe, and I'll try to use the rest to buy a pair of gold bracelets. When you get married, we can't have people looking down on you." Harper laughed happily. You always love me the most, Mom. Chloe pushed the door open and walked in. Martha immediately pulled the envelope of money toward herself. What are you doing in here? I heard you talking about the bride price, so I came in to ask, Chloe replied. Her mother's face instantly turned cold. The Smiths are so well off. What could you possibly lack in the future? It's your sister marrying Vince who needs the extra preparation. Chloe pulled up a chair and sat down. I don't care how much of your own money you want to give her, but the things the Smiths brought over for my marriage must be clearly accounted for. Martha frowned. We are family, yet you are nickel and diming over every cent. Harper needs gold bracelets for her wedding, but you supposedly don't need anything for yours? You've already calculated everything so clearly, so what's wrong with me keeping a clear account of the money? Hearing this, Harper, who was holding a piece of red fabric, burst into laughter. Are you really being stingy with me over this little bit of money? When I'm rich in the future, this tiny amount won't even be enough for me to buy a single purse. Chloe looked right at her. That's even better. Someone who's about to become a millionaire's wife surely doesn't need to use her younger sister's bride price to buy gold. The smile on Harper's face stiffened. Martha was so furious she jumped to her feet. Chloe, the older you get, the harder you are to discipline. I just don't want people saying in the future that the Smiths gave 10 parts, but the daughter-in-law only kept 1, while the other 9 parts became her older sister's dowry. Out in the courtyard, the matchmaker and 2 elders from the Smith family still hadn't left. Chloe had deliberately spoken loud enough for them to hear. Martha's expression immediately shifted. She could play favorites behind closed doors, but she didn't want a reputation for stealing her daughter's bride price in front of the in-laws. Chloe called the matchmaker inside and asked her to record every single item the Smiths had brought. She specified which funds were meant for the wedding, which items were to be given directly to her, and which items the parents were allowed to keep according to local customs. Martha sat nearby, her face as dark as a thundercloud, but she couldn't snatch the paper away. From that day on, her mother started looking at her differently, but Chloe didn't care. In her previous life, she had given money to Vince, helped Harper when her marriage hit the rocks, and obeyed her mother time and time again. The reward for all that was a hammer blow to the back of the head. In this life, her money was hers. Whoever brought about their own disaster would have to bear it themselves. The night before bed, Harper stood by Chloe's bedroom door, crossing her arms with a smirk. Chloe, you just hold on to those few pennies of the bride price tightly. In a few years, I'll follow Vince to the city, and by then, I'll have more gold than I can even wear. Meanwhile, you can stay right here selling meat with Liam Smith. Chloe folded her clothes and placed them into her trunk without looking up. Since you believe in him that much, make sure you stay with him for a very long time. No matter what happens in the future, don't ever change your mind. Harper scoffed. Just keep being jealous. She spun around and walked away, her footsteps so light it was as if she were on her way to claim a massive prize. Chloe closed the lid of her trunk. At this very moment, Vince Miller was still secretly entangled with Tracy Adams. He was using Tracy's past to blackmail her, making her too afraid to tell anyone. In her previous life, Chloe hadn't found out about the affair until after she was already married. This time, she knew early on, but she had no intention of running to Harper to warn her to stay away from him. This sister of hers had used an entire lifetime to snatch Vince Miller away. Chloe was naturally going to let her have exactly what she wanted. As for the situation between Vince and Tracy, Chloe would handle it her own way. The wedding date had been set. When that day arrived, in front of the entire town, she would let Harper see perfectly clearly the very first gift her future millionaire husband had in store for her. A month later, both families set up wedding tents in their courtyard. Holding a joint ceremony had been Harper's suggestion. She claimed that 2 sisters getting married on the exact same day would make things exceptionally lively and festive. It would also save the townsfolk from having to make 2 trips. After hearing this, Martha immediately agreed, even praising Harper for being so considerate of the family. Chloe didn't say a word. Vince Miller had already squandered most of his bride price money on drinking, gambling, and paying off petty debts. If the 2 weddings were held separately, the Miller family simply wouldn't have had enough money to put together even a few decent tables. Now that they were combined, the Smiths were paying for the vast majority of the meat, fish, alcohol, and the catering staff. If Harper wanted to keep up appearances, Chloe was perfectly fine letting her keep them. That morning, Lily Smith ran into Chloe's room very early, carrying a cardboard pastry box that still smelled of fresh butter. Have something to eat, sister-in-law. My brother said you'd be so busy this morning you definitely wouldn't eat anything. Chloe, who was adjusting her sleeves, took a piece of pastry upon hearing this. Lily sat down next to her, admiring the wedding dress Chloe was wearing, and smiled so widely her eyes crinkled. Thank goodness it fits perfectly. The other day, I was so worried the tailor in the city might have gotten the measurements wrong. Chloe turned to look at the girl. Liam had this custom made? Who else? Lily said, brushing her fingers over the lace at the cuffs. He ordered it a long time ago, even before the two families swapped the marriage arrangements. Back then, he made me find a way to ask about your waist size and height without letting you know. Chloe's hand paused for a moment. In her previous life, after she married Vince, Liam had brought high-quality meat over to their mother a few times, claiming he had extra at home. Once, when she was preparing to go to the city to restock her inventory and was short on cash flow, he had someone deliver the money to her, simply telling her to pay it back whenever she could. Back then, Chloe had assumed he helped because their two families knew each other. Now, it seemed that wasn't the case. Lily kept talking. My brother is so clumsy. Even if he likes someone, he doesn't know how to speak up. Don't be intimidated by his cold expression. He's actually the most easygoing person in our family. Chloe chuckled. You make it sound like you're trying to sell your brother. Well, I'm just afraid you might change your mind, the girl replied, laughing at her own joke before pressing another piece of pastry into Chloe's hand. Outside in the courtyard, firecrackers had started popping. The townsfolk were arriving in increasing numbers, and children were running around the banquet tables. The sound of laughter and chatter filled the entire yard. When it was time to step out, the moment Chloe walked through the door, she heard several women standing nearby, gasping in admiration. The ivory-white wedding dress was perfectly tailored. It hugged her waist neatly, and the skirt wasn't overly puffy, making it very easy to walk in. In the town at that time, such a style of dress was still quite rare. Harper stood nearby, wearing a traditional red wedding outfit made in a common style. She was naturally pretty, and with her makeup done, she stood out even more. However, as the compliments gradually shifted toward Chloe, the smile on Harper's lips noticeably stiffened. She looked Chloe's dress up and down, then said in front of the surrounding guests, "It's beautiful, sure, but renting it for a day must have cost a pretty penny. Make sure you're careful with it. It'll be a huge hassle if you tear it and they make you pay for it." Before Chloe could even reply, Liam's voice rang out from behind. "There's no need to pay for anything." He walked over in a crisp new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, carrying only the faint scent of soap. "I bought this dress." The people nearby immediately turned to look. Harper frowned. "You actually bought it?" Liam nodded, his voice calm. "It's my wife's wedding dress. I don't like to rent." Lily, standing beside him, immediately chimed in. "My brother was even worried my sister-in-law wouldn't like the smell of the slaughterhouse, so he hired Mr. Lewis to fill in for him these past few days. Just today, he's taken 2 showers and changed into 3 different outfits since morning." The crowd burst into laughter. Liam shot his sister a look, the tips of his ears turning slightly red, but he didn't deny it. Harper's expression clearly shifted. In their past life, she had been Liam's wife for many years, but the two of them had been distant ever since their wedding day. She hated his job. Whenever she saw him returning from the pig pens, she would pinch her nose, sometimes even refusing to let him sit at the same table. In that lifetime, Liam had never bought a wedding dress for her, nor had he ever skipped a day at the slaughterhouse because of her. Harper looked at Chloe, a newfound irritation visible in her eyes. Chloe simply adjusted her skirt and said, "When someone genuinely values you, you don't need to force them. They naturally know what to do." Chloe didn't name anyone, but Harper immediately turned her face away. The wedding reception continued. Liam followed Chloe as she went from table to toast the guests. The food prepared by the Smiths was extremely generous, featuring plenty of meat, fish, and chicken. There was no shortage of anything. Over at the Miller family's tables, Vince had drank until his face was red. He continuously threw his arms around his friend's shoulders, bragging that he would definitely move to the city and make big money in the future. Harper sat next to him, listening with a very bright smile. In the middle of the reception, a woman suddenly appeared at the gate. Chloe recognized Tracy Adams immediately. A few days before the wedding, Chloe had secretly sought her out. In her previous life, it wasn't until after she married Vince that Chloe learned he had forced himself on Tracy and kept some things to blackmail her, making her too afraid to speak up. In this life, Chloe didn't plan to let that situation drag on. She had simply given Tracy a method. There was no need to risk her life confronting Vince, let alone prove everything. On the very first day, she just needed to make him believe that the things he feared being exposed were in her hands. Tracy walked straight into the courtyard. The moment Vince saw her, he immediately sprang to his feet. The smile on Harper's face vanished. Tracy stopped in front of the head table. Her face was pale, but her voice remained clear. "I don't intend to ruin the wedding. I just want to tell Vince Miller one thing. The things you gave me, along with those papers and that letter, I still have them." Vince's face changed color. "What nonsense are you talking about?" He lunged forward, intending to drag Tracy outside. If he had calmly denied it, the people around them might not have understood what was going on. But that reaction was no different from a confession. The nearest tables immediately fell silent. An elder frowned. "Vince, why are you grabbing her? If there's an issue, say it in front of everyone." Tracy stepped back to dodge his hand. "You once said that if I dared to speak out, I shouldn't expect to live in peace in Oakhaven. I came today just to say that from now on, I'm not afraid anymore." Harper jumped up, her face completely white. "What exactly is the relationship between you two?" Vince turned and yelled, "There's nothing. She's crazy." Tracy looked at him. "If there's nothing, then what papers are you so afraid I'm keeping?" That single sentence sent the entire courtyard into an uproar. Harper stepped forward, intending to ask more, but as soon as she heard the people around her start gossiping about how Vince used to harass women in town, her face flushed red and then turned deathly pale. She stumbled 2 steps and finally fainted right next to the banquet table. Martha screamed and hurriedly caught her daughter. The wedding immediately devolved into total chaos. Chloe stood not far away, choosing not to push her way into the crowd. A little while later, Harper regained consciousness in her room. Terrified that Tracy would continue making a scene and cause her daughter to lose face, Martha immediately took out the newly purchased pair of gold bracelets. She pulled Tracy aside and lowered her voice. "Take these and leave. We'll pretend today's incident never happened." Tracy looked at the bracelets in Martha's hands, then looked at Chloe. Chloe didn't say a word. That gold had originally been bought with the money Martha had wanted to take from Chloe's bride price. Chloe had managed to keep most of it, but there was still a portion her mother had found a way to transfer to Harper. Now that it had fallen into Tracy's hands, at least it would give her the money to leave this place. Tracy took the bracelets without promising to stay silent. She only said, "I will leave. But from today on, Vince Miller better not come looking for me." After saying that, she turned and left the house. By the afternoon, the news had spread almost across the entire town. Everyone knew that on Harper's wedding day, a woman had come looking for her husband, and that the moment Vince saw her, he panicked so much he tried to drag her away. Harper cried her eyes out. However, when Martha advised her that if she really couldn't bear it, she should just follow her back home and they would figure out the marriage situation later, she gritted her teeth and refused. "I'm not getting a divorce." Martha was stunned. Harper tightly gripped her handkerchief. "A man's outside affairs don't matter. As long as he has money in the future, I'll make him listen to me." Chloe heard those words from outside the door, then turned and walked away. In her previous life, Chloe had once advised her sister to treat Liam kindly, thinking that since they were sisters after all, she should help her out if she could. The result was her smashing a hammer into Chloe's head. In this life, Chloe had no more interest in playing the Good Samaritan for Harper. She had chosen Vince Miller, and she stubbornly held on to him even after seeing his true colors for the very first time. Therefore, Chloe would let her walk the rest of her path entirely on her own. After getting married, Chloe discovered that life at the Smith household was far different from what her mother had claimed. Liam Smith had no intention of making her hover around the kitchen or take care of the whole family like a hired servant. Whatever he could do himself, he still did. He handed most of the monthly earnings from selling meat and raising the pigs over to her for safekeeping. Lily never treated her as an outsider either. Whenever there was something delicious, she saved a portion for her, and whenever there was a family matter to discuss, she called Chloe to sit in. One evening, Liam brought his ledger home, placed it on the table, and asked her to help look it over. Flipping through a few pages, Chloe realized that he managed the livestock farm quite strictly. The cost of feed and medicine, the number of pigs ready for market, and the regular weekly customers were all clearly recorded. However, his business methods were still quite old-fashioned. The meat was mainly sold around a few neighboring towns. On days with a surplus of meat, he had to lower the prices to sell it off quickly. Chloe pointed to some of the numbers. "If we just wait for customers to come pick it up, we're always going to be passive. You should try dividing the customers into 2 groups. For restaurants that buy regularly, lock in a fixed quantity every week. Keep another portion for retail customers. As for the meat that hasn't sold yet, we need to figure out a better way to preserve it. We can't end up having no stock on days when the price is good, and being forced to lower the price on days when we have too much." Sitting across from her, Liam listened to everything and then asked a few clarifying questions. He wasn't annoyed that she was interfering in his business, nor did he use the excuse of, "What does a woman know?" to shut her up. 2 days later, he actually went to town to inquire about buying another used chest freezer and proactively sought out a few new restaurants to pitch his goods. Seeing this, Lily teased him. "My brother hasn't been married long, but he already knows how to listen to his wife." Liam simply replied, "If the idea is right, I listen." What's embarrassing about that? Hearing this, Chloe didn't say anything more. The Smiths already had a solid foundation. As long as they moved away from outdated methods, their lives would only get better and better. Things were completely different on Harper's side. Not long after the wedding, Vince had already reverted to his old habits. During the day, he wandered around town, and at night, he drank or played cards. When he ran out of money, he would come home and rummage through the cabinets. If he couldn't find any, he would immediately demand it from his wife. Harper had been spoiled by Martha since childhood, pushing most of the heavy chores at home onto Chloe. Now, in the Miller household, there was no one to serve her. Her mother-in-law was old, so the fields still needed tending. Meals still had to be cooked, and clothes still had to be washed. Moreover, Vince considered housework to be a woman's job. In less than a month, Harper's hands had grown rough, and her face was more tan than before. One time, Chloe ran into her on the street. She was carrying vegetables back from the fields, the shoulders of her shirt soaked with sweat. An older woman in town jokingly asked her, "Back when you lived with your mother, I never saw you doing this kind of work." Harper immediately straightened her back. "What's wrong with working hard for a bit right now? My Vince is going to do big business in the future, and I'll enjoy the benefits for the rest of my life." The people standing around just laughed upon hearing that. Chloe didn't intervene. A few days later, Vince actually announced that he wanted to go to the city. He had heard from some people in town that it was easy to make money trading up there, so he came home and said he was short on initial capital. Hearing this, Harper acted like she had struck gold. She started going around borrowing money from everyone. At the first house, she spoke politely, but by the next few houses, everyone knew exactly why she was coming and found excuses to avoid her. Unable to borrow anything, Harper even stood right outside their gates and scolded them. "When my family strikes it rich in the future, don't have the audacity to come asking us for a loan. If you lend a hand now, you'll get a share. Once we're already wealthy, it'll be too late to come running to us." An older woman couldn't stand listening to it anymore. She set her basin of vegetables down firmly. "If your husband has any real capability, he should earn the capital himself. He hasn't made a single dime yet, but he's already trying to borrow from the whole town. How is that going to make you rich?" Harper turned red with anger, but still refused to give up. Eventually, she dragged Martha over to Chloe's house. That day, Liam had just returned from town, bringing a bag of supplies and some snacks that Lily liked. Seeing his mother-in-law and sister-in-law arrive, he greeted them briefly, before taking the things into the kitchen. Liam didn't interfere in his wife's family affairs. As soon as Martha sat down, she looked around the house. A new chest freezer was placed next to the side room, and the courtyard had just been renovated and cleaned. The pig pens in the back had also been partitioned off, looking much neater than before. She took it all in before saying, "Chloe, your family has been making quite a bit lately, haven't you?" Chloe poured some tea, set it down in front of her mother, and replied, "Just enough to get by." Harper immediately spoke up. "Vince is preparing to go to the city for business, but he's a little short on capital. Give me $30,000 first. Once he makes money, he'll pay you back." Chloe looked at her. "30,000 is not just a little. For your family, what is it really?" "Liam sells meat every single day," Harper retorted. Chloe let out a laugh. "You just said your husband is going to do big things. A man like that surely wouldn't have to rely on 30,000 from a meat seller." Harper choked on her words. Martha immediately furrowed her brows. "What kind of way is that to talk? It's normal for sisters to help each other. When Vince strikes it rich later, you'll benefit too." "Why would I need to benefit from him?" Chloe asked, setting her teacup down. Martha was stunned into silence as Chloe continued. "The money in my house is earned by Liam working from morning till night. I won't take my husband's hard-earned money and give it to someone else to test their luck. If Vince had a clear plan and a proper place to do business, I might listen. But just saying he's going to the city to make money and expecting others to hand over the capital, I won't give it." Harper's voice turned cold. "You're just afraid I'll end up better off than you, aren't you?" "You can think whatever you want, but there is no money," Chloe replied. Martha was so angry she was about to continue scolding her, but right at that moment, Liam walked out of the kitchen. He placed a bowl of soup in front of Chloe and said, "Eat this first. You mentioned your stomach was hurting today, so don't let it get cold." Harper looked at the bowl of soup, then glanced at the bags of groceries on the table. Lily ran in from the courtyard and casually added, "My brother even went out of his way to the store in town this morning to buy apples for my sister-in-law. The shop owner said this batch was good, so he bought a whole bag." Martha looked at Chloe, then at Liam, her gaze clearly shifting. Harper, on the other hand, fell completely silent. In their past life, she had lived in this very house, but the relationship between her and Liam had been tense from the start. She hated his profession and everything related to raising livestock. Once, she had even thrown the clothes he had just changed out of right into the courtyard because she thought they smelled. Now, watching Liam take the initiative to cook and buy the things Chloe liked, Harper's expression grew increasingly sour. After eating for a while, Martha brought up the loan again, but Chloe still refused. This time, Liam didn't speak up to make the decision for her either. He simply sat beside her, eating his meal, acting as if Chloe's money was hers to handle as she saw fit. Harper held her tongue until the end of the meal before standing up. Before leaving, she turned back and said, "If you won't give it, fine. When Vince strikes it rich later, don't regret this." Chloe replied very concisely, "Keep that blessing for yourself." The mother and daughter left the house. Lily watched them go and shook her head. Chloe didn't discuss their affairs any further. A few days later, Harper managed to scrape the money together by borrowing small amounts bit by bit. Martha even took out her life savings and gave it to her. With the money in hand, Vince followed a group of townsfolk up to the city. The day he left, Harper stood at the end of the road to see him off, dressed up neatly as if her husband were going away to take up a major executive post. From that day on, everywhere she went, she bragged, "My Vince just needs to get to the city, and he'll have opportunities. A man like him can't stay in this small town for his whole life." Some people who heard this just laughed. Others didn't even bother to reply. Chloe only knew one thing. In their past life, at this point in time, Vince hadn't been able to make any big money yet. He went to the city a few times. Sometimes he worked odd jobs for a few days. Sometimes he followed others around doing random trades, and then he would end up empty-handed again. The massive wealth that Harper remembered so vividly wouldn't appear until much, much later. And the first person to earn that money wasn't Vince Miller. It was Chloe. Harper had taken almost all her savings and betted on a man she thought was her lucky ticket. Chloe had no intention of reminding her. If her sister wanted to prove she had made the right choice that badly, she could just wait for Vince to return and see for herself exactly what he brought back with him. Vince Miller had been in the city for almost a month when Harper noticeably lost weight. In the past, whenever she left the house, she always made sure her hair was combed and her clothes were clean. Now, there were many days Chloe saw her on the street, with her hair just hurriedly tied in a bun at the nape of her neck, her hands cracked from labor, and her complexion much ashier than before. But whenever anyone asked about her husband, she would immediately hold her head high. "Vince is looking for business connections. Once he establishes himself in the city, why would I still be here doing these kinds of chores?" she would say. The townsfolk had heard this so many times they didn't even bother arguing anymore. Some turned their backs and laughed, others just shook their heads. Harper knew, but she still tried to maintain a smug appearance, as if just talking about it enough would instantly make those days of wealth a reality. Chloe didn't care. During those days, she and Liam reorganized the operations at the livestock farm. After separating the regular wholesale clients from the retail customers, their unsold meat inventory dropped significantly. Even managed to find 2 restaurants in town willing to sign contracts for a fixed supply every week. Just as their business stabilized, Chloe ran into Tracy Adams again. That day, Tracy was standing on the road behind the market, an old canvas bag resting beside her. Upon seeing Chloe, Tracy called out to her and pulled her into a quiet corner. She opened her bag and took out a red handkerchief. Inside was the pair of gold bracelets Martha had given her on the day of the wedding. "I'm giving these back to you," Tracy said. Chloe didn't reach out to take them. Tracy said softly, "I know this gold was never mine to begin with. If you hadn't shown me what to do that day, I wouldn't have been able to escape Vince Miller so easily." Only after the wedding, when Vince left for the city, did Tracy dare to investigate her past. She explained that she had gotten lost at a train station when she was little, and was subsequently raised by a family in this area. Recently, she had tracked down someone who used to work at the station back then. That person vaguely remembered an Addams family who had searched for their daughter for a very long time. The lead was incredibly thin, but at least it was worth a shot. "I plan to go to the city to look for them," Tracy said. Chloe looked at Tracy's bag, which contained barely anything besides 2 changes of clothes. "Then you absolutely shouldn't give these back." Tracy was stunned. "Living and eating in the city both require money," Chloe continued. "Keep these bracelets. If you need to, sell one of them first. If you really do find your family, you can pay me back however you want later. But I didn't help you just to get the gold back." Chloe pushed the handkerchief back toward her. "One more thing. Until you're absolutely certain Vince no longer has the means to come looking for you, do not return to Oakhaven. Now that he knows you dare to fight back, he's even more likely to cause trouble." Tracy fell silent for a moment, then nodded. Before leaving, she clutched the red handkerchief tightly in her hand. "Chloe, if I really do find my family one day, I will remember this kindness." Chloe didn't offer any more polite pleasantries. They parted ways right at the end of the road. About half a month later, news from the city started trickling back. The men who had gone with Vince returned to town first. They recounted that he had gotten acquainted with a very wealthy man named Marcus Donovan. This man knew many business owners and often took people out to eat and drink at expensive places. As long as someone was willing to work for him, they could make money much faster than working a regular wage job. Upon hearing the news, Harper was so overjoyed she ran straight to her mother's house. By the next day, the entire town knew that Vince was about to do business with a big boss. As for Chloe, the moment she heard the name Marcus Donovan, her hands paused. In her past life, this man had appeared much later. Initially, Marcus just acted as a middleman, brokering shady trades of questionable origins. Later on, his business dealings grew increasingly dirty. Eventually, he moved a portion of his operations overseas, setting up a shell company and using all sorts of underhanded tactics to lure people into transferring money to him. In the previous life, Vince had also followed him. But at that time, Vince wasn't an important player. When the operation was finally investigated, Vince proactively confessed to many things and thus escaped the heaviest sentence. In this life, the timeline had shifted. Harper kept sending word to the city, urging her husband to cling to the wealthy man and do big things, telling him not to come back with just chump change. Vince had always been greedy for quick wealth. Meeting a man like Marcus only made it easier for him to dive headfirst into the fire. Chloe simply recorded that name and the time frame in her private notebook. She didn't tell anyone, nor did she run off to try and stop him. Since those events hadn't happened yet, her words held no weight. Moreover, Vince was an adult. Whichever path he chose to take, he would have to bear the consequences himself. Chloe shifted her entire focus back to her own business. In her previous life, she had started her clothing trade quite late. By then, many people had already squeezed into the market, and it took her several years to gain a firm foothold. In this life, the opportunity was presenting itself much earlier. She began taking bus trips to the city with Liam, checking out suppliers while observing the new markets. The clothes sold in Oakhaven at that time were still mostly old-fashioned styles. But in the city, the number of young women with their own income was growing rapidly. They wanted nicer, more flattering clothes, but the majority of the beautiful items were too expensive. That gap in the market was glaringly obvious. One evening, Chloe spread her notes across the table. "I want to try doing business in the city," she said. Liam looked over the numbers she had written down. She explained that she wanted to start by selling clothes, conducting market research first, and then renting a space if things looked promising. He asked how much money she needed. Chloe gave him a number that was not small. Liam was silent for a moment, then went into the bedroom. He brought out a wooden box that had always been kept in the closet. Inside were the savings he had accumulated over many years, neatly divided into stacks. He placed the majority of it in front of her, keeping only a portion for himself. "This is a reserve for the pigs, medicine, and household expenses. You take the rest." Chloe looked at the money and asked, "Aren't you afraid I'll lose it all?" Liam pulled up a chair and sat down. "If money is lost, it can be earned back. But if you see an opportunity and don't dare to try because you're afraid of losing money, the timing might never be right again later." He didn't claim to be certain she would succeed, nor did he say that as long as she was happy, she could spend however much she wanted. He only asked about her plan, the risks, and the capital needed to be kept in reserve. Precisely because of that, Chloe felt even more reassured. 2 days later, Martha found out about it. She marched straight over to their house and started scolding from the courtyard. "Your sister just went to the city to do business, and now you're demanding to follow suit. Do you think the city is paved with gold? You probably just saw someone else getting an opportunity and wanted to force your way in." Chloe was reviewing the customer list for Liam. Hearing this, she just kept writing. Martha grew even angrier. "Are you even listening to me? Harper and Vince going to the city is their business. What business is it of yours? What does a woman know about doing trade? Liam makes such a steady income. Isn't that enough to live on?" Chloe put her pen down. "Since you're so confident in my sister's eye for people, just wait for her to become a millionaire's wife. I'm not fighting her for that role." Stifled by her response, Martha turned her anger toward Liam. "And you're just going to let her mess around?" Liam, who was tying up a few bags of animal feed, simply replied, "It's our money as husband and wife. We'll figure it out ourselves." Martha wanted to keep arguing, but since no one engaged with her, she finally left in a huff. Chloe and Liam continued exactly as planned. He found a reliable relative to look after the farm while the couple was away. The ledgers, cash for goods, and meat delivery schedules were handed over clearly. They certainly weren't abandoning everything to rush off to the city. Chloe didn't take the entire sum of money to gamble with either. A portion was for renting a space, another for buying initial inventory, and the remainder was kept as backup cap. On the morning of their departure, Lily stood in the courtyard, handing Chloe a bag of food and reminding her to buy her a really pretty dress if the business went well. Liam locked the door and carried their luggage onto the bus. The passenger bus left the town, traversing the familiar dirt road before merging onto the highway. Somewhere else, Vince Miller was running after Marcus Donovan, trying to find a way to get rich quick. Chloe, too, was heading toward the city. But this time, she wasn't waiting for a man to bring luck to her. She was going to get it herself. Once in the city, she didn't rush to rent a storefront. For the first 3 days, she and Liam practically walked through all the major wholesale markets. In the mornings, they watched people receiving shipments. At noon, they stood outside shops, observing the customers coming and going. At night, returning to their guest house, they sat down to calculate rent and fabric costs, tailoring costs, and the profit margins they could sustain. Memories of her previous life helped Chloe know what would become popular later, but she didn't treat it as a ready-made answer. The market had changed because she arrived earlier. If she simply copied the exact methods from her past life, it would be very easy to sink money into things whose time hadn't yet come. It took over half a month for her to finalize her initial direction. At that time, women's clothing in the city was clearly divided. The cheap items had outdated styles and sloppy stitching, while the nicer clothes were concentrated in large boutiques, with prices beyond the reach of many young, working women. Chloe chose to target the middle ground, nicer than market stalls, but more affordable than high-end boutiques. Most importantly, the clothes had to be easy to wear. After listening to her plan, Liam simply asked, "Are you planning to source ready-made goods or make them yourself?" "Make a portion of them ourselves," Chloe replied, pulling out a few pre-drawn sketches. Her first designs weren't overly complicated: fitted dresses that cinched at the waist, women's blouses with softer cuts, and a few styles of skirts that could be easily mixed and matched with various tops. She took the trends she had seen in her previous life and modified them to suit the current fabrics and wearing habits. The couple rented 2 small, adjacent units in a bustling commercial district. One unit served as the showroom, and the other as storage. Chloe didn't order thousands of pieces from the factories as some had advised. For the first batch, she only had a modest quantity of each style produced. A factory owner, seeing the small order, even laughed and said, "Doing it this way, the profit isn't even worth it." Chloe replied, "We'll make more once they sell. If the inventory just sits in a warehouse, paper profits mean nothing." The man looked at her for a moment, then nodded and accepted the order. When the first batch of goods arrived, Chloe personally inspected every single seam. There was one batch of shirts with slightly crooked collars. The factory insisted they were still sellable with just a small discount, but Chloe returned the entire batch. Liam stood by her side without complaining, directly recounting the inventory with the factory's staff. The factory owner was annoyed at first, but after seeing them pay on time and increase the size of their subsequent orders, his attitude shifted. Sales were slow for the first 10 days. But by the 3rd week, one particular dress style began receiving constant inquiries. Customers bought it and brought their friends back for more. A few small neighboring shops even came by to ask if they sold wholesale. Chloe didn't raise the prices, nor did she immediately quintuple her orders. She simply increased the volume batch by batch, monitoring the sales speed before making any adjustments. Liam took charge of logistics. He handled communications with the factories, arranged for transport, and tracked the incoming shipments. Whenever Chloe was busy attending to customers, he would audit the warehouse himself, clearly logging every single bale. Once, a supplier, seeing that Chloe was a young woman, tried to hike the fabric prices higher than the agreed rate. Liam didn't raise his voice or start a huge argument. He simply placed the price lists from 3 other places on the table. "If your price changes, we'll change our supplier. Business can't be one price today and another tomorrow." Realizing he couldn't push them around, the man finally agreed to honor the original rate. Chloe and Liam gradually established a clear division of labor. She took care of the designs, customers, finances, and the overall business direction. He managed the merchandise, logistics, suppliers, and any external errands. Neither of them simply stood in the background, acting as a prop for the other. 3 months later, the small shop began attracting a loyal customer base. Half a year later, their merchandise was being stocked and sold in over 10 other stores across the city. Chloe still kept enough cash on hand to cushion them for at least a few months in case sales slowed down. Only the remaining profits were reinvested to test new designs. Around that same time, news from Harper reached them. Vince had sent money back home. It wasn't enough to make him a millionaire, but to the folks back in Oakhaven, it was more than enough to allow Harper to hold her head high again. She immediately traveled to the city to find her husband. Chloe only found out later that the trip was completely different from what Harper had imagined. Vince wasn't living in poverty, but the money he was making was neither clean nor transparent. He frequently wined and dined with Marcus Donovan's crew, throwing money around recklessly, and was often seen with more than a few women by his side. Harper threw a massive fit, but the thing she questioned him about the most wasn't what he was doing, but rather how much money he was making. At first, Vince tried to dodge the questions. However, after realizing that his wife only cared about the money, he gradually stopped hiding things. Marcus Donovan also met Harper a few times. He dressed luxuriously and drove a nice car. He always talked about profits that an ordinary person would take years to earn. Harper was quickly drawn in. Not only did she not try to pull Vince away, but she also started urging him to stick close to Marcus. Since we're in the city, we need to do big things. If you're always scared of this and that, when will you ever be better than anyone else? She pushed. Vince, already greedy for quick cash, acted even more boldly under his wife's urging. From running minor errands, he started taking on more important tasks. Harper gradually got involved as well. Initially, she just helped hold money and transfer a few funds. Later on, she put her name on various documents, introduced acquaintances, and directly participated in discussions that Vince previously hadn't allowed her to know about. She thought she was seizing her lucky break. In reality, she was stepping deeper and deeper onto a path of no return. Chloe heard snippets of news from townsfolk who had come to the city to work. No one knew exactly what Marcus Donovan did, only that the people who followed him spent money very lavishly. Chloe still didn't intervene. There wasn't enough evidence to draw a conclusion, and she had no intention of turning memories from her past life into proof. Her business continued to progress. After half a year, she started putting her own labels on her best-selling designs. By the time almost a year had passed, the name of their shop was remembered by many. Chloe registered the trademark, hired additional sales staff, and gradually transitioned from a small shop into her own distribution network. Liam didn't abandon his old trade during this time either. He used his share of the profits to expand the livestock farm, invested in cold storage facilities, and began supplying meat steadily to several restaurants in the city. Someone once asked him why he didn't just quit his job entirely to sell clothes with Chloe. Liam just laughed. She does what she's good at, and I do what I'm good at. That sentence was absolutely right. Chloe didn't need a husband standing behind her, handing her money to spend, and he didn't need to claim his wife's success as his own achievement. A year after leaving Oakhaven, Chloe's first shop no longer had enough room to store inventory. Standing in the middle of their new warehouse, she watched as bales of clothes were brought in, then opened her ledger to cross-reference the revenue. The numbers before her were still far from the massive fortune she had amassed in her previous life, but this time, everything had arrived earlier, steadier, and cleaner. At this point, Vince Miller was still chasing after Marcus Donovan, using quick cash to prove his capability. Meanwhile, Chloe had already laid down her first foundation with her own 2 hands. It was at this moment that the narrative Harper so firmly believed from their past life began to reveal a very simple truth. Vince Miller had never brought wealth to Chloe. He had merely stood next to a woman who knew how to make money and soaked up all the glory for himself. The person who had created that life, from beginning to end, had always been Chloe. A few years later, the first flagship store of Chloe's brand officially opened in the city's largest shopping mall. She no longer appeared at every branch regularly. Regional managers and accountants handled the majority of the work. However, every month, she still made unannounced visits to a few stores. That day, the moment she walked through the door, she heard a woman yelling from the shoe-fitting area. "What are you just standing there for? I told you to kneel down and take my shoes off." A young woman in a staff uniform stood beside a chair, her hands clasped tightly together. At her feet lay several crumpled bills that had just been thrown onto the floor. The store manager, Mia Quinn, stood nearby. Not only did she not intervene, but she also frowned at the employee. "Nina, just do what the customer asked. She's buying several outfits, and adding a pair of shoes makes it a big order. You're new here. Don't be so difficult over a little thing." Nina Hughes' eyes turned red. "I can fetch the shoes, swap the sizes, clean them, or help her try them on. But I don't want to kneel." Mia Quinn immediately pulled her aside. "If you still care about your pride while working, what can you actually get done? How much does the store pay you a month? Don't you know?" Chloe stepped forward. "Which part of the employment contract states that the salary includes kneeling?" Mia turned around. Upon seeing Chloe, her expression instantly changed. "Miss Chloe." Chloe didn't reply right away. Instead, she bent down, picked up the bills from the floor, and placed them on the table nearby. Nina Hughes stood up straight. The young woman looked at Chloe, clearly still unaware of who she was. Mia hurriedly explained. "You misunderstood. This customer is buying a lot. I just told the staff to accommodate her a bit." When you work in customer service, you sometimes have to be flexible. Being flexible doesn't mean forcing others to endure humiliation. Chloe looked at the name tag on Mia's chest. If the store's employees make a mistake, you can remind them, retrain them, or handle it according to the regulations. But when a customer makes an out-of-line request, you must step up and resolve it. You are the manager. not someone who throws their employees under the bus to take the fall for you. Mia still tried to force a smile, but big clients are hard to keep. If we lose someone like her, this month's revenue will be affected. I would rather lose one customer than let the entire staff know that as long as a customer has money, their manager will trade their dignity for sales, Chloe replied. The smile on Mia's face vanished. Chloe called over the HR administrator who had accompanied her. Review the internal feedback for this branch. If there have been similar incidents in the past, compile all of them. As for Mia Quinn, as of today, you are relieved of your managerial position. Hand over your work and complete your resignation procedures. Mia was stunned. You're firing me just because of this? No, Chloe looked at her. It's because you don't know how to manage people. Mia still wanted to argue, but the HR staff member ushered her into the back room. Nina Hughes stood rooted to the spot, her eyes still red. Chloe handed her a packet of tissues. As long as you follow the proper procedures, keep doing your job. Today's incident won't affect your performance review. Nina hesitated slightly. I thought I was going to be fired too. Why? Miss Mia said I didn't know how to please the customers. Chloe shook her head. The store hired you to sell merchandise, not to be a slave. But from tomorrow on, if a customer is being difficult, report it to the person in charge immediately. Don't just stand there and let things escalate to this point. Nina nodded very quickly. Right at that moment, the click-clack of high heels echoed from outside. The woman from earlier returned, holding a handbag she had just forgotten. She took off her sunglasses, and upon seeing Chloe, her footsteps slowed. Chloe recognized that face as well. Even though the chin was sharper, and the bridge of the nose higher than before, and the heavy makeup almost completely concealed her old features, Chloe still recognized Harper. Harper stood a few steps away from Chloe, her gaze sweeping from the store's sign to the employees who were addressing Chloe as their boss. For a few seconds, Harper's expression was completely blank. This store is yours? She stared at Chloe a moment longer, then let out a laugh. I didn't expect you to make it this far, too. The word too was emphasized very clearly. Harper stepped forward, looked at the suit Chloe was wearing, and then glanced around the store. But opening a few shops is nothing to brag about. Vince is working with Mr. Donovan overseas now. The money entering our account in a single day is more than the entire month's revenue of this place. Chloe looked at the designer handbag Harper was holding. Is that so? I told you from the very beginning. I chose the right person, Harper said, smiling very smugly. But when Chloe looked her straight in the eyes and said a single sentence, that smirk instantly stiffened. Honest business really is harder to make quick money in compared to certain other professions. Harper's expression changed almost immediately. What do you mean by that? I'm just saying that when money comes too fast, you need to know exactly where it's coming from, Chloe replied. She didn't lower her voice, nor did she take a step forward. Harper stared at her. That look confirmed one more thing for Chloe, Harper knew. At the very least, she knew that Vince's current money was not entirely clean. Over the past few years, Chloe hadn't just been sitting idle. Through her business connections, Chloe knew that Marcus Donovan had moved the majority of his operations across the border. Initially, they were disguised as brokerage firms. Later, call centers appeared, luring people into making investments or taking out loans and transferring money through multiple intermediary accounts. The names behind these operations changed constantly, but Vince Miller's name appeared more and more frequently. In her past life, he had only been a runner, managing a few small groups, and had managed to confess in time when everything fell apart. This life was different. He had been pulled up to a higher position by Marcus. Harper was no longer staying on the sidelines either. Through various business connections and people from their hometown who had moved to the city, Chloe gradually heard rumors that Harper had been present when some new groups received money. There were even people who said she was involved in introducing recruits and putting her name on several bank accounts. Chloe couldn't confirm these things at the moment, but it was at least enough to show that her sister wasn't just standing by watching Vince work. She hadn't been dragged into it. She had stepped in herself. Harper tightened her grip on her purse strap. Don't think that just because you make a few clothes, you have the right to lecture me. My husband earns his money through his own capabilities. Chloe nodded. That's good then. If the money is clean, why do you need to react so strongly? Harper choked on her words. Chloe didn't give her the chance to drag the conversation into a screaming match between sisters. I have work to do. If you want to buy something, the staff will assist you according to protocol. If you want someone to kneel, this store won't serve you. Harper's face turned red. Are you kicking me out? No, Chloe said. I'm setting the rules for my store. She turned to Nina. Call someone to handle the items she selected. If she isn't buying them, put them back where they belong. With that, Chloe walked straight into the back room. Harper stood behind her for a long time, before finally leaving. Through the glass, Chloe saw her making a phone call the moment she stepped out of the mall. Chloe didn't need to hear to guess who she was talking to. But that no longer mattered. Harper had spent the last few years proving that she had stolen a man who could take her to the top. Chloe had spent that exact same amount of time building her own brand from scratch. The only difference was that their paths were vastly different. Chloe earned every single penny in a way that could be laid straight onto an auditor's desk. Her sister was getting richer by the day, but every time someone asked where that money came from, her expression grew increasingly sour. Some things looked a lot like luck from afar. It was only when you stood close enough that you realized there was nothing underneath but a bed of nooses. Almost half a year after running into Harper at the store, Tracy Adams found her biological family. The news came very unexpectedly. One afternoon, Chloe was checking inventory in the warehouse when she received a phone call from an unknown number. The person on the other end introduced himself as Tyler Adams, Tracy's younger brother. The Adams family had never stopped looking for their lost daughter over the years. Thanks to the clues Tracy brought with her, combined with the old records at the train station, the two sides were finally able to confirm her identity. Tracy had also told her family the entire story of how she had been controlled, threatened, and forced into silence by Vince Miller. Tyler didn't ask her lengthy questions over the phone. A few days later, he came directly to the city to meet Chloe. He was dressed in plain clothes and spoke very clearly. "My sister mentioned you a lot. If you hadn't helped her back then, she probably wouldn't have been able to leave that town." Chloe simply replied, "I just helped her escape from a bad person. She walked the rest of the path on her own." Tyler nodded, then moved on to the main topic. He currently worked in the Economic Crime Investigation Division of the police force and was participating in a special task force related to cross-border fraud rings. The name Marcus Donovan had already appeared in some investigation files, but the connections between him and his domestic contacts had not yet been fully pieced together. Hearing this, Chloe didn't immediately recount everything she remembered from her past life. Her memories could not serve as evidence. Chloe only provided things that could be verified. The names of a few people who had appeared alongside Vince, the time he had started following Marcus, the instances when Harper publicly bragged about her husband were as overseas, along with some information Chloe had heard directly from business people in the city. Once, a business partner of hers had mentioned a company registered under the name of an acquaintance of Vince's. Chloe still kept the business card and her appointment book from that day. Tyler took them, not asking why she remembered these details so clearly. "This much is enough to investigate further," he said. Chloe also didn't ask about the progress of the task force. From that day on, she didn't know exactly how the investigation was unfolding, but things on Harper's side began to change very rapidly. Through people from their hometown who came to the city to work, Chloe heard that her sister was no longer just following her husband around, attending parties, or spending money. Harper directly managed some of the revenue, used bank accounts under other people's names to transfer money, and even participated in recruiting new people from their hometown. Her method for choosing people was also very simple. Whoever was in debt, whoever wanted to get rich quick, or whoever had little understanding of the law was easier to persuade. Initially, Harper only said it was a high-paying overseas job. Later on, the people who followed them discovered that the work they had to do was making phone calls and sending messages to lure others into transferring money. Some wanted to quit and go home, but it wasn't easy to leave. Harper still continued. She even pushed Vince to demand more authority from Marcus Donovan. In their past life, Vince had been arrested, but ultimately didn't have to face the harshest consequences. Harper knew that outcome, so she believed that he would escape it this time as well. What she didn't know was that in their previous life, Vince only stood at the middle tier. When the ring was busted, he confessed to many leads and handed over some evidence, so he was considered for leniency. But in this life, precisely because Harper was always afraid her husband wasn't a big enough shot, Vince had climbed much higher. He managed people, he distributed the money, and he participated in deciding how certain groups operated. Harper also stood right beside him in many of these stages. The two of them had effectively erased almost all of their own ways out. Sometime later, Vince began to feel that something was wrong. A few accounts were suddenly frozen, an acquaintance of Marcus lost contact, and several money transfer points were consecutively inspected. He wanted to pull some of their people back, but Harper objected. "We're making the most money right now, what are we pulling back for? If you're this scared, when will you ever be the boss?" Vince was also greedy, so in the end, both of them stayed. Not long after, Harper called Martha, saying that the couple was about to open another company, and then they would bring her to the city to live. Hearing this, Martha was so overjoyed that she went around bragging to the entire town. She even deliberately sought out Chloe's store. "Your sister is about to become a big boss." Don't think that just because you opened a few stores, you're better than her, Martha said. Chloe was signing some delivery papers. Hearing this, she simply asked, "Do you even know what her company does?" Martha immediately raised her chin. "They are making big money, so it's a trade secret. How could they tell you?" "It's best you stick to that answer," Chloe replied. Her mother didn't understand what she meant and was about to scold her further. But Chloe called an employee over to escort her out. A few days later, Tyler called Chloe again. He didn't reveal the details. He only reminded her that if any strangers asked about matters related to Vince or Marcus in the near future, she shouldn't interact with them on her own. Chloe understood that the net had begun to close. She didn't call Harper, didn't remind Martha, and certainly didn't warn Vince. She had helped Tracy because Tracy was a victim. But Harper and Vince knew exactly where their money came from and still continued to drag more people into it. She had no reason to save them from the consequences they had created for themselves. Over a month later, the special task force officially pulled the net shut. Many domestic contacts were arrested simultaneously. The money collection points, intermediary accounts, and the list of participants were seized. Marcus Donovan was subdued in a coordinated joint investigation. Vince Miller was arrested while preparing to transfer a large sum of money. As for Harper, she was detained at a rented apartment registered under someone else's name. Chloe only learned later that when the police entered, there were still several notebooks on the table in front of her sister, containing lists of people and money transfer accounts. There was no such thing as her being just Vince's wife. The evidence showed that she was directly involved. The day the news broke, Chloe's phone practically blew up with calls. People in town asked questions, Martha called, and a few relatives also reached out to her. Chloe didn't answer all of them. That evening, Liam set the newspaper down on the table. The news about the case only reported the information officially released by the authorities, but the names Vince and Harper were enough to shake their entire hometown. He looked at Chloe. "Did you know this was going to happen?" "I knew they were heading down the wrong path," Chloe said, closing her inventory ledger. "But going this deep was their own choice." Liam didn't ask anything else. Back in their hometown over the past few years, Harper had always been mentioned as a woman with good fortune, having married the right husband who knew how to make money, dressing more luxuriously than everyone who had ever laughed at her. Harper herself had always believed that this time, she had won. She had snatched Vince Miller first. She had personally pushed him to a higher position, and then stepped in alongside him to tightly secure the fortune she thought belonged to her. In the end, what Harper secured was indeed very tight, so tight that when the handcuffs locked around her wrists, there was no way for her to let go anymore. After Marcus Donovan's case was made public, their hometown was in a state of near chaos for several days. The people who had listened to Harper brag about her husband doing big business only now realized where that money came from. Those who had been scolded by her for refusing to lend her money spared no sarcastic remarks. The news of Vince Miller and Harper being arrested quickly spread throughout the region. Only Martha still refused to accept it. She called Chloe incessantly. At first, it was crying, but then it turned into demanding orders. "You know so many people and have money. Find the best lawyer. Use your connections to help your sister. Harper has been faint-hearted since she was little. How is she supposed to endure being in there?" Chloe listened to it all, then simply said, "You should ask what she did first." Martha immediately flew into a rage. "Whatever she did, she's still your biological sister." "So the people who were scammed out of their money don't have families?" Chloe retorted. Unable to answer, her mother immediately hung up. Chloe thought the matter would end there. 3 days later, Martha showed up right in front of the shopping mall that housed Chloe's largest store. She didn't come alone. She was accompanied by 2 relatives. One of them held up a phone, recording from the moment they stepped out of the car. Martha sat right in front of the entrance, crying and telling everyone around that her youngest daughter was wealthy but cold-blooded. Her own sister was in trouble, but she refused to spend a dime to save her. A crowd quickly gathered. The staff called Chloe. By the time Chloe came downstairs, Martha took one look at her, slapped her thighs, and wailed even louder. "There she is. She has so many houses and stores, more money than she could ever spend, but she leaves her own sister to live or die. I raised her all these years just for her to treat her mother and sister like this." Chloe walked straight over. "Make sure you get a clear shot," she said. The relative holding the phone froze. Martha also fell silent for a beat. Chloe stood in front of her mother. "If you want to record the whole thing. Don't go home, cut out the first half, and claim I didn't let you speak." Martha immediately pointed a finger at her. "You still dare to raise your voice? If you hadn't refused to help your sister, how would she have ended up like this?" "Harper got arrested because I didn't give her money?" Chloe asked. Martha choked on her words, then yelled, "If you had been willing to provide the capital back then, why would Vince have needed to follow someone else and do those things?" Chloe looked her straight in the eye. So according to you, because others didn't give them money, they went and committed fraud, and that's the fault of others? Whispers began to ripple through the surrounding crowd. Martha turned red with anger and raised her hand, intending to slap Chloe. Chloe caught her wrist midair. In her past life, Chloe had stood still and let her strike because she thought of her as her mother. In this life, she no longer had that habit. How you want to love Harper is your business, Mom, but don't hit me and then try to make me take responsibility for what she did. Martha jerked her hand away. She was just following her husband. Harper directly managed the money, used other people's accounts to transfer funds, recruited people into the ring, and profited from the scammed money. There is evidence for all of these things. She wasn't just standing on the sidelines and accidentally got implicated. Chloe stated each fact one by one without raising her voice. There are people who lost their medical funds, families who went into debt because they believed those fraudulent lies. You love your daughter, but those people also love their parents, spouses, and children. Martha still tried to argue. But she is your biological sister. You have money. What's wrong with finding someone to save her? Family ties don't turn a criminal into an innocent person. Chloe let go of her mother's hand. And I certainly won't use my money and connections to force others to bear the consequences in her place. Martha stood stunned for a few seconds before turning back to the crowd, continuing to wail about how unfilial Chloe was. Chloe didn't argue any further. Liam stepped forward at that moment. He had been standing on the outskirts from the beginning, his phone still recording. It wasn't to humiliate her mother. Ever since he realized Martha had brought people to record a video, he guessed she might edit the story and post it online. Chloe instructed her legal department to take the full recording, along with the officially released information about the case. Anything that wasn't allowed to be disclosed was absolutely not to be released, while any part that had public announcements would be cited directly from the original sources. Sure enough, Martha's video appeared online that very night. But before it could spread far, the full version was posted. Viewers clearly heard her blaming Chloe for not giving money to Vince, and they also clearly heard the criminal actions Harper was being investigated for. Public opinion instantly shifted. Not only was Chloe's brand not boycotted, but many people also spoke out against using the concept of filial piety to pressure others into covering up for criminals. From then on, Martha stopped coming to the store to cause trouble. The case dragged on for some time. Chloe didn't participate. Aside from the times she was required to provide relevant information, the sentences for Marcus Donovan, Vince Miller, and Harper were ultimately determined based on the evidence, the amount of money involved, each person's role, and the consequences they had caused. Harper wasn't sentenced because Chloe wanted her to run into trouble. She was sentenced for the things she had done with her own hands. After everything concluded, Chloe brought her family back to their normal rhythm of life. The fashion brand continued to expand, but she didn't chase after numbers at all costs. Underperforming stores were closed, and new ones were only opened in suitable locations. Liam also developed his livestock farm into a food supply company. He built a cold storage system, signed contracts with restaurants and supermarkets, and finally no longer had to stand at the slaughterhouse himself every day like before. Lily later finished her studies and chose her own career path. Chloe and Liam had a daughter. No one in the house forced the little girl to become like her father or her mother. Whatever she liked, she got to learn. If she made a mistake, she fixed it. No one ever compared her to others. Martha lived for many more years in their hometown. The relationship between Chloe and her mother could never return to the way it was. Chloe still sent the necessary funds when she was sick and handled the duties a daughter should, but she no longer gave her the right to interfere in her family. When her mother passed away, Chloe returned to arrange a proper funeral. After most of the guests had left, she stood alone in the old courtyard. The tree in front of the door was still there. She used to run around this place behind Harper when the two sisters were little. There was a time her sister had shared half a pastry with her, and another time when it rained, she had pulled Chloe under her own jacket. They weren't enemies from the very beginning. But the years of being favored by their mother had made Harper accustomed to the idea that everything better had to belong to her. Greed then turned her competitiveness into jealousy, and ultimately, that jealousy had morphed into a hammer blow. She no longer wanted to figure out exactly when everything had started going wrong in their past life. That was no longer important. In their previous life, Harper had watched Chloe living in a large house, possessing money and stores, and had wrongfully assumed that Vince Miller was her lucky charm. In this life, her sister had snatched him away first. Harper had truly gotten the exact man she wanted, and had even helped him climb much higher than he had in their previous life. But ultimately, the truth remained unchanged. Vince Miller had never been a man capable of turning a life of poverty into one of wealth. The person who had accomplished that was, and always had been, Chloe. Chloe left the old house just as the sky was turning dark. Liam was standing outside the gate waiting for her. their daughter was sound asleep in the car. Seeing her approach, he opened the car door and reached out to take her bag. Chloe did not look back a single time. Harper had once believed that as long as she stole the right man, she could steal Chloe's entire life. But true fortune had never rested in Vince Miller's hands. It resided in Chloe's own mind, in the choices she made for herself, and in the fact that she had never handed her life over for anyone else to decide. This time, she didn't need to snatch anything back, because from beginning to end, this life had always been hers. Thank you for listening to the very end.
And that's a wrap! Harper learned the hard way that toxic shortcuts lead to ruin. Chloe proved that true wealth and peace come from your own hard work. What did you think? See you next time!